They said I was a disgrace. But the mirror, it always knew the truth. I remember the night like it happened yesterday. London, damp streets, the smell of rain in the air. I was 23, standing on the doorstep of the home I had grown up in, holding a small suitcase, feeling smaller than the wet street beneath my heels. My parents' faces were pale with shock and anger. My brother, Daniel, glared at me as if I had betrayed the entire family by simply existing. "You're not our daughter," he said, the words slicing through the cold night. "You're nothing to us." The door slammed. I didn't move. I didn't cry immediately. I just stood there, listening to the rain patter against the roof above, listening to the silence of a home that had once been mine. I realized in that moment that sometimes the people we love the most can be the ones who hurt us deepest. The first nights on the streets were the hardest. I found shelter where I could, sometimes a friend's sofa, sometimes a grimy hostel room. The city felt enormous, indifferent, and cruel. People would stare, some would whisper, some would step over me, pretending I didn't exist. I learned to walk tall anyway. I learned that beauty and dignity don't erase pain, but they make it bearable. I worked odd jobs, cleaning cafes, washing dishes, serving people who couldn't look me in the eyes without judgment. And yet, when I went home to my tiny room, I would look at the mirror and whisper, "You're still here. You are enough." Because survival isn't just about food or shelter, it's about keeping your soul intact. If you're still listening, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps. It makes moments like this feel seen. I started studying at night, online courses, free lectures, anything I could get my hands on, business, design, marketing. I scribbled notes on coffee-stained paper, taught myself strategies, planning my future in a city that seemed determined to keep me invisible. Every rejection letter, every cruel glance, every whispered insult became fuel. I promised myself that no one would ever decide my worth again. Years passed. I moved to a small but growing fashion startup in London. The owner, Helen, didn't care about my past. She only cared about my ideas, my creativity, my work ethic. I poured myself into that job. Late nights, endless coffee, ideas scrawled across notebooks and napkins. For the first time in years, someone saw me before they saw my gender. Within a few years, I was leading campaigns, managing teams, then eventually creating my own company. I named it Mirabella, wondrous beauty. Not the kind in a magazine or on a billboard, but the kind earned through pain, resilience, and survival. I built a brand that reflected strength, elegance, and the quiet power of someone who had refused to be erased. By 40, I had everything I had once dreamed of. A thriving company, loyal staff, a home filled with soft light, laughter, and my own peace. But peace doesn't erase memory. Sometimes I would see a street sign, hear a familiar voice, or feel a door close in the wind, and I would remember that night in Manchester, standing on wet pavement, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Then life had a curious way of returning the balance. One afternoon, my assistant told me someone was here for an interview. "They say they're your nephew," she said softly. I paused. A nephew? Daniel's son? I hadn't seen Ethan since he was a child, barely 5, his little curls bouncing as he ran around the garden. And now he was sitting in my office, resume in hand, nervous, uncertain. When he saw me, his eyes widened. "Aunt?" he whispered. I smiled gently. "Hello, Ethan." He told me about his life, about how his father's business had collapsed, about the divorce, about money lost and pride shattered. He needed a job, and now he was sitting in front of the woman his father had once thrown into the streets. For a moment, I felt something swell inside me. Not anger, not revenge. Something quieter, something sharper. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives gently, like recognition. I could have said no. I could have reminded him of the past, but the past no longer held power over me. So I hired him. He was cautious at first. Quiet, polite, almost afraid to speak. But over time, he began to open up. He worked hard, stayed late, asked questions, listened. He reminded me of my younger self. Desperate, uncertain, but unbroken. Tell me in the comments. Which city are you watching this from? I'd love to know. It's moments like this, connecting, that remind me we're never truly alone. Months passed. Ethan became one of my most trusted employees. One evening he said, "I think my dad realizes now that he was wrong. He talks about you, how he wishes things had been different." I didn't say a word. Sometimes silence is louder than any apology. Sometimes silence is the only way to show that healing has already happened. And then the day came when Daniel himself walked into my office, older, smaller in spirit, his hair streaked with gray, his eyes heavy with regret. I could see the years etched on him, the pride, the arrogance, the cruelty, all worn away by life's own harsh lessons. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, looking at me like he was seeing someone he had never really known. Finally, his voice cracked. I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." I walked slowly toward him. I didn't need to speak. Forgiveness doesn't need words. I put my hand on his shoulder and let him feel it. Let him see that I had survived, that I had thrived, that I had become more than he could ever imagine. I didn't hate him. I didn't need revenge. Life had already balanced the scales. He had been humbled. That was enough. Some nights, when the city is quiet and the lights are soft, I sit by my window with a cup of tea. I watch the rain fall on the streets below. And I think about the girl who once stood alone, a suitcase in her hand, her heart shattered, and I whisper to her, "You made it. You are beautiful. You are enough." If you're still listening, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you believe everyone deserves a second chance. Because life isn't about holding grudges. It's about moving forward with dignity, with grace, and with a heart that has finally learned to forgive. I think about Ethan, now confident and thriving in the company, and I realize that giving him a chance was not about mercy. It was about showing that the pain we endure doesn't define us. It shapes us. It can make us kinder, stronger, wiser. And Daniel, he walked away that day a different man. Not because I forgave him, but because life itself had taught him the lessons he refused to learn when he was younger. And I walked away free. Free from hate, free from fear, free from the shadows of a past that no longer owns me. They called me a disgrace. They left me on the streets. But the same people now stand in line to work for me, to learn, to earn, to see what I always knew, that strength isn't in breaking others, it's in surviving yourself. I am Isabella, and this is my story on Oma True Stories.